Hi, I'm Andrew Wright, Principal of Professional Southport, and this is the Andrew Wright Property Podcast. I've built a multi-million-dollar property portfolio, delivering a seven-figure annual rental income, and led my real estate team through thousands of sale and lease transactions. In each episode, I share real deals and strategies that will help you find, fund, and operate profitable property deals. The aim of this show is to provide education and build a community of like-minded investors who can collaborate, share insights, and help each other in each other's journeys. You can make excuses or you can make money, but you can't do both. So come and join us.
Hello and welcome back to the Andrew Wright Property Podcast. Now today we're diving into a strategy that's practical, powerful, and something almost anyone can start with: house hacking. This is about turning your home or even your business premises into an income-producing asset to reduce or eliminate living costs. I've never heard of it, and I'm sure a lot of you out there haven't heard of it, so I'm really interested to find out what this is all about. Andrew, welcome back to the podcast.
Oh, thanks, Adam. Good to see you, man.
You too. Now look, Andrew, you've used this across both residential and commercial property, haven't you? So let's start simple. What exactly is house hacking in simple terms?
Well, the most common house hacking strategy is in a residential context when you think of the rooming accommodation legislation, and it's just simply renting out some rooms in your house. Now, I wouldn't have been able to survive the first couple of years after university if I didn't house hack myself, and I was able to do it not with my own property, but I did it with my mum and dad's property. So we had a large 6-bedroom house down the Gold Coast, and mum and dad left for 3 or 4 years to build a business, felt sorry for us and said, well, Andrew, do what you want with the house. We just want you to pay for the rates, the water and the insurance, and if you can generate a bit of income, then go for it. And my brother and I lived in 2 of those rooms, and we rented out the other 4, and there was that cash flow that got us through because I didn't have a job straight out of uni, and then I got into a commission-only real estate job, and I just literally wouldn't have survived. But in those days, I rented out downstairs for $150, and there was 2 rooms upstairs that we got $50 each for, and that $250 a week back in 1990, 35 years ago, is probably the same as getting $800 a week now in today's dollars, and it made a massive difference.
So this is the good old-fashioned, in my mind, the good old-fashioned, when you're young, buy a property, get your mates in to help pay for it.
It's exactly what it was, and look, it was just a good experience too. I basically became a property manager at that time, and it was a good experience to learn how to manage property. And what you do with that cash flow, well, you either pay for the bills, that's what we did, the rates, the water, the insurance. If there's anything left over, well, you if you own the property, you can pay off a mortgage or you can put it into some other investments. But in all honesty, my motivation to do this podcast was mainly for young people starting out now who are using this 5% deposit scheme, borrowing 95% with massive repayments, interest rates going up. In all honesty, you don't have a choice but to consider house hacking.
Yeah.
It is the best strategy a first home owner can use, not only to cover their mortgage expenses, but actually pay off their mortgage as soon as possible.
Okay. Now, I've got a lot of questions that come to mind as you start to talk about this. But first of all, why do most people treat their home, as a liability?
Well, because it is. It just doesn't cash flow. I mean, you hear all the big property gurus saying your house is not is not an asset, it's a liability, whether it's a Grant Cardone or Robert Kiyosaki. They all say the same thing, and they're absolutely right. So interest on your home loan, if you own it in your own name, is generally not tax deductible. Your rates are not tax deductible. It's just a liability. So, there's a lot of podcasts out there about rent vesting in Australia, buyers agents in particular talking about rent vesting. But for people who want to buy their first home, I actually believe that house hacking is even more powerful a strategy than rent vesting.
What's rent vesting?
Well, that's where instead of going to buy your first home, you just go and rent somewhere, pay rent
I see.
where you want to live, and go out and invest and buy a property maybe in a cheaper location where you can afford to buy at that time. So that's that strategy. It's well documented. We could do a whole podcast on rent vesting, but we won't because it's been covered by a million other podcasts. But house hacking, pretty big term in America in particular. There's a lot of podcasts on house hacking over in America. I was doing it in 1990 with a property I didn't even own, and I've done it ever since with other residential and commercial properties that I own today.
That brings me to a little side question. Can you do it with properties you don't own? Can you go and rent? I mean,
Yes, you can. Well, provided you have the owner's permission, you can do it. Now, there's, as a residential real estate agent, we often get prospective tenants make application to lease properties that we manage, and on the basis that, can I sign a 2-year lease on this and go and Airbnb the property by myself? Now, you can only do that if the landlord approves of it, but some landlords have no objection to doing it. So in a residential context, it's actually quite common. They call it Airbnb arbitrage.
Right.
Where people will go and rent 10 houses and then they'll go and use them all for Airbnb if the local jurisdiction there allows it, and they can profit quite handsomely with that arbitrage.
So that is a form of house hacking.
Absolutely.
On steroids, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. That is house hacking. Yeah.
Wow. So, look, how much realistically can this sort of reduce your living costs?
Well, it depends on how many rooms you want to rent out. So in my case there, we rented out 4 of the 6, and it more than covered all of the expenses. It put cash in our pocket to buy some food, and it covered everything. But it depends on the property. I mean, just to give you an example, where it might apply, Adam, I had an ex-employee of mine ring me a little while ago saying, Andrew, can you help find a 1-bedroom apartment for my son? He wants to, take advantage of the incentives with the first home buyer scheme and the no stamp duty up to $700,000 at the time, a few months back. And I said, well, what sort of property do you want? Where do you want it? And she said, we just want a 1-bedder. And I said, well, why would you want a 1-bedder? There's no leverage in a 1-bedder. I said, look, what you should do is borrow an extra $150,000 or an extra $100,000, buy a 2-bedder and house hack it. You get the leverage of your tenant paying off half the mortgage for you, and you're going to end up with a 2-bedroom apartment with the same cash flow that it's going to cost you to pay for a 1-bedder. Why wouldn't you buy a 2-bedder?
Now, the biggest question that comes to mind is, will lenders take house hacking into account as, income towards being able to service your debt under this sort of scenario?
Yeah, look, great question for a finance broker. I don't currently operate a finance brokerage, but I suspect the answer is no if it's an owner-occupier loan. It's a bit different if you're buying an investment property. Of course, they will take that cash flow into your capacity to repay. But for an owner-occupier property, I suspect, and a mortgage broker should be asked that question, but I suspect the answer is probably no, they won't take it into consideration.
Okay. So it looks like on the surface this is a great way to get extra income, to, especially as you mentioned, for a young first home buyer. But I guess one of the questions, and maybe this isn't something you can or want to speak to, but it's sort of a lifestyle decision too, isn't it, about who you're going to be sharing your home with?
Absolutely. I mean, I have a large house myself, and I was looking at doing the homestay thing at some stage. My kids are half Japanese. They speak the Japanese language. We were looking to maybe get 1 or 2 Japanese students over on a homestay, and it pays pretty well, but we didn't go down that track because of the time commitment. You've got to actually drive them to their school and prepare meals for them. So I'm interested in a passive cash flow from house hacking, but not the homestay type of model. And personally, I'm not interested in the Airbnb model where you've got all the extra cleaning and all that sort of management involved. But for some people, it works quite well.
I'm glad you brought up the homestay, because I do have a friend I know who's been doing that quite some time, and the benefit is that it's usually, when I say short term, let's say it's fixed term, 3, 4, 6 months, and you're being paid well above normal rental rates. But you are right, there are obviously conditions upon that you have to get them around, that you have to prepare meals. But she said it's the best thing ever, that generally they're just so happy to be where they are, staying where they are. They stay to themselves a lot of the time. Lovely people, and has generally never had a problem. Didn't feel like it was actually a housemate. It was almost literally like they were renting a room that just sort of and stayed out of the way and came down for meals.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of those relationships, particularly with international students, end up in lifelong friendships as well, Adam.
Absolutely. So what about then your advice around the, I was going to say legalities, probably not that, but paperwork, or, are you getting mates in on handshake deal? If we're looking at young people, or do you put in place proper boundaries and paperwork?
When I was 20 years of age, I didn't, but obviously I would recommend that you do. Now, these days, legislation has grown around the rooming accommodation business, and there's a separate part of the residential tenancy legislation actually specifically for rooming accommodation. So, yeah, you should have a rooming accommodation agreement. You've got compliance around having the interconnecting smoke alarms in every room. You've got you're supposed to provide the common area facilities. You're supposed to keep them clean. In the current marketplace, you'd usually offer those type of tenants free Wi-Fi, car parking, all that type of thing. All needs to be taken into consideration. But what's more important, I think, if someone's considering house hacking, is that you probably get advice from your accountant and your lawyer, because this income needs to be declared. So you need to declare it on your tax return. Now, I'm sure in practice, there's a lot of times it isn't declared, but you should. And that can also have implications on your capital gains tax exemption for your principal place of residence.
Sure.
Even from a land tax perspective, there is specific legislation around the amount of the floor plan of a house that you can rent out and still keep your principal place of residence exemptions for land tax purposes. Okay.
So a big takeaway here is obviously get advice from the right professionals when considering doing any of this.
I'll tell you why I'm qualified to agree with that comment is because I didn't get advice on one particular transaction. I got accounting advice on something, but I didn't talk to my lawyer, and I ended up with a $53,000 land tax bill in relation to something which I thought my accountant would know. But accountants are trained in federal law, being the Income Tax Assessment Act or whatever they call it these days, but they're not all trained in state law around land tax. Now, I don't want to go into that particular problem that I face, but I actually sued the state government back. I took them to QCAT to fight that $53,000 land tax bill, and I lost, even though I thought we had a pretty good case. But if I had sought legal advice up front with what I was doing with my residence at the time, I'd be $53,000 better off, plus another 5 or 6 in legal fees. So it is important that you get tax advice and legal advice when you're going down that track.
Sure. And I want to bring up another situation I've seen before, which I understand to be the wrong thing to do, or let's call it what it is, probably illegal, and there's probably people out there doing this. But I want to understand what would happen, and this is a property management question for you, had they gone down the right track. So here's what this person was doing. They were getting flatmates in, being paid cash to help. So they were leasing the property, just a normal rental, renting out a couple of the rooms to people who weren't on the lease. Don't know whether they're declaring the income, probably not. And had been doing that forever and a day. What's the scenario there if you were to do it properly? If you were wanting to get extra people in, and even
You're talking about if you're a tenant?
Yes, if you're a tenant.
Yes.
And
Yep.
and with the goal of, because the goal of this person was to cover the entire rent.
Yep.
So that effectively she was living there rent-free.
Yep.
Now, to make a long question short,
Yes.
is that possible if you've gone and gotten the lease yourself and to do that and to cover all your costs by effectively subletting, but I know that's not what it's called if you were to go through the process.
Okay, well, of course it's possible. Our particular property management business does not allow subleases in place with any of the tenancies that we operate. What we do allow, if someone has a 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom property and they want someone else to come into the property, we make sure they fill in a rental application and they can become what we call approved occupants. So we do let them live there, and I'm sure in some cases those approved occupants put some money, some cash money in the hands of the people with the lease. But we generally do not allow subleasing in our lease contracts. But every real estate office is different. Yes, you can sublease if a lease allows you. If there's a provision in a lease that allows you to sublease, then you can do it. And that's exactly what happens in those Airbnb arbitrage situations where someone signs a 2-year lease and there's a clause built in there that that person is allowed to advertise on Airbnb to do short-term accommodation.
Sure. Okay. So to go back to that scenario, had that person just, even with the rotation of people going through, gotten an approved occupant submission through, doesn't need to tell those people what she's paying in rent, can charge them whatever she feels she'd like to and can get away with, and that can be done.
Well, it is done. It's not allowed under our the leases.
They're
that
technically
myself,
not meant to be paying
No.
them. They're allowed to be living there, but under the provisions of the paperwork.
I'm sure it's completely commercial and common practice for people who share a tenancy to help cover the cost of the lease.
But technically not legal.
Well, it depends on the lease that you provide. In our office, in our case, we don't allow subleasing.
Okay.
But when you go and do a routine inspection and there's 20 lots of shoes at the front door instead of 4 or 5, generally you get an idea whether there's extra people living there, and that's where we start asking questions. Why are there so many shoes? How come there's so many people, with shoes at the front here in this 4-bedroom house? We thought there was only 2 people renting the property.
This is how I knew about it, because my friend was the person who was living there, and knowing that, she knew what was going on.
Yeah.
And was told to put away all her stuff in her bedroom the night before and stuff like this. So.
Adam, I went and did a sales appraisal in Southport maybe 10 years ago, and in one extreme case, I actually saw mattresses up in the ceiling, above those little roof tiles. There'd been a couple that have been pushed aside, and there were mattresses in the ceiling.
Wow.
30 pairs of shoes at the front of the property. Now, we weren't managing that. It was someone else who came and asked me to do a sales appraisal. Right. And that's...
Well, why would they be selling it from what they're making from rent?
Wow. I don't know. It might have been tenants in there that were doing that. I can't remember the circumstances.
Sure.
But yeah.
Okay. Any other examples? We've been through a few of house hacking. Any other sort of instances that you've seen, or common examples of how people do this?
Well, I just mentioned that the main house hacking strategy, I guess, is considered in a residential context, but it is equally possible to do commercial house hacking, and I've done it my whole life as well.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Well, look, even when I first rented a property at 16 Nerang Street, Southport, for Professional Southport, I was trying to expand that business, and what happens when you have intentions to grow a business is generally you'll lease a property that's a little bit bigger than you need. So
Expecting to grow.
Yeah, so you're going to have spare space there. So when I negotiated that first 5-year lease, it was a lot of money. It was $120,000 a year just in rent. And I said to the landlord, look, I can't really afford this at the moment. I'm leasing your premises because I want to grow into it and I want to expand my business. I don't want to move every 2 years when I put on more staff. Will you allow me to sublease some of this area? So even as a tenant, we talked about the Airbnb arbitrage before with residential property. Even as a commercial tenant, I did that with my first lease at that property. I got approval from the owner, had it built in a clause in the actual lease that I was allowed to sublease.
Yep.
And I had a migration agent in there, and they rented a small area of our office. And, I can't remember the numbers. It might have only been $1,000 a month I charged her, but you add 12 grand a year over 5 years, there's 60 grand a year of less expenditure that I had.
Absolutely. Would it be fair to say that, getting approval to sublease commercial properties is a lot easier to get over the line with agents than residential?
Yeah, it is quite common practice, yes.
Okay.
Even a month ago, I went up to Harvey Bay to have a look at a couple more sheds I'm looking to buy, and one of the tenants in there had even subdivided one of the big sheds. He's just put some sort of big curtain there, and he's subleasing a whole heap of his shed to some car detailing mob. He's a gas company. He supplies gas bottles, and he's subleased a large part of his shed to a car detailing mob, and that was approved by the owner. It's all above board, and It could be an office, it could be a shed, but if you have a premises that is too big for you, why not generate the extra cash flow?
Well, you've opened up my eyes to a lot of, and I've had a huge amount of learning through what I've learned through this whole podcast series, Andrew. So as soon as we start talking things now, my mind starts to, drift off to areas that you've been doing for forever. So my next question would be, for a very smart operator who knows a niche market, a niche area, have you ever seen a big commercial premises rented for the purposes of subletting the entire thing to make more than what they're paying in overall rent?
Yes, it happens. So even there are some complicated leases where tenants may actually agree to lease a whole building, and they may have an option built into it to buy the property 5 years down the track, for example. So it's in their interest to sublease the area. They might have a gross lease over the whole building, and if they can rent out the individual spaces for a higher rent than that lease of the whole building, well, they can profit the difference. Over a period of time, they can increase the value of a commercial property by increasing the rents. And if they've got an option to purchase that property at a future date at a fixed price, if they can make the property more valuable by leasing the individual components of that building at a much higher rate per square metre, well, they can profit handsomely.
Sure. Great idea. Granny flats. That's got to be another form of house hacking, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I bought my personal residence in 2005, and I have house hacked my personal residence for the last 20 years. So I get $420 a week or whatever it is rent every year for the last 20 years. That's 20 grand a year. There's 400 grand extra income just from house hacking. I've declared it every year on my tax return.
Yep.
I'm not hiding it, but there's 400 grand there.
Wow.
Just that one house hack.
Yep.
Just from my residence. And, I faced some scrutiny from my wife in the early years. I don't want someone else living next to me. Shouldn't we keep that for our family when they visit and they can stay in the granny flat? I said, well, look, I'm paying the bills here. Somehow we got to pay off this mortgage. And sometimes as the man in the house, you got to stamp your foot down and say, look, forget about the lifestyle. When we get super rich, we'll worry about the lifestyle. For now, let's house hack. Forget about the lifestyle. And this is what every first homeowner needs to do as well. If they buy a property with 2, 3, 4 bedrooms, they're not going to want someone else living with them, but you do what needs to be done. And if you're borrowing 95% mortgage on your house with interest rates going up, let me tell you, you've got no choice. House hacking is the best thing that you can do to get you through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Are there any tax implications with granny flats? Land tax implications?
I'm only going to cover this very broadly because I'm not licensed.
And I'm
not allowed to give advice.
This is general in nature.
And let me tell you, it is very, very complicated. And every single state in Australia is different with relation to land tax. What I can say, just as one example of where someone could get caught out, if you're getting on let's just say your elderly kids move out of your house and you do have a granny flat, one example where you could get into trouble is if you do have a lot of land in your investment property portfolio, you could go and it'd be quite logical to say, well, why don't we just go and live in the granny flat and we'll go and rent out our big house. Now, there's an example where because you're renting out more than 50% of your house as a floor plan,
it's no longer
you're no longer going to get the principal place of residence exemptions on your land tax. Now, in Queensland, individuals can have $600,000 each of land value, which is the threshold. So for a couple, if your land is worth less than $1.2 million, you're not going to be affected anyway. But if you do own lots of land in your own names, and you're over that $1.2 million threshold, you could be caught out by an example like that where you go and live in your granny flat and rent out the big part of your house thinking that you'll get a whole heap more rent for it, and then you get a nasty surprise. And as I mentioned, I'm not joking, I'm the dead set numbers. I got a $53,000 land tax bill come in the mail. I thought, oh my God. Like these are big. If you got an expensive principal place of residence, the numbers are a lot bigger. So you need to get legal advice.
Make sure
when you're doing something like that.
All right. So look, if someone's listening and thinks this is something that they're wanting to do, but they're sitting on the fence, what's your final piece of advice to anyone who's sort of maybe weighing up the lifestyle, but versus the benefits? What would you say to them?
Look, I think the two people that benefit most from this, the two types of people, one is the first homeowner. Go out and rent every room you can. Develop some passive cash flow. Don't waste that money on alcohol when you get it in. Put it into your mortgage. Pay off your mortgage quicker. House hacking is a far better strategy than rent vesting, in my opinion. And if you're a self-employed business person paying rent on a commercial premises, go out and get advice and consider buying a commercial property for yourself. And if it's too big for your needs because you're wanting to expand, rent out some of that spare space. Look, my office now where I've moved to, I've subdivided, put a wall down the middle. I'm getting $45,000 a year for renting the office next to where I am now because it's surplus to my needs. You plug into a calculator $45,000 a year extra into your mortgage and see how much interest you save over 10 or 20 years.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Fantastic, Andrew. Thank you very much. It's been a very comprehensive breakdown of something I don't think a lot of people have really thought about. It's practical, it's accessible, and something people can actually implement pretty much straight away and very easily. So look, house hacking is one of those strategies that doesn't require you to be wealthy. Just strategic in how you use your property and thinking about it. If you got value from today's episode, please follow the show and share it with someone who's looking to get ahead faster. Please do give us a comment, a like, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any episodes. Want to do remind you what this podcast is all about. Andrew's not here to sell anything. He's here to create a community, to help with advice, to help property investors to get ahead, give new ideas, but he also wants guests to come on who have other ideas to share with him. So please, if you'd like to be a guest, there is a link in the show notes. Jump in there. And of course, you can always reach out to Andrew directly at hello@andrewwrightproperty.com.au. Andrew, once again, thanks very much.
Thanks, Adam, and thanks, listeners. Please forward this podcast to some other people. We've got to get our subscribers up. We've got to get some more people subscribed, so please do me a favour and pass it on. Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Andrew Wright Property Podcast. This is all about building a community of like-minded investors who can share real-life stories, experiences, and collaborate with a view to helping each other. Join us. Get in touch through the link in the show notes. I look forward to you joining me on the next episode.